He screamed that she didn't belong in first class. He told the flight crew that looking at her was ruining his flight and demanded she be dragged back to economy, where he claimed she fit in. The entire cabin sat in stunned silence as the man, a wealthy CEO named Preston Calloway, threw his weight around, threatening to fire the entire crew if they didn't remove the young black woman from the seat next to him. He thought his platinum status was the ultimate power card. He was wrong. What Preston didn't know was that the woman he was trying to evict wasn't just a passenger. She was the one who had just signed the check to buy the entire airline. And when she finally broke her silence, the karma that followed wasn't just satisfying, it was brutal. The interior of the Stratton Airways Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of beige leather and brushed aluminum. In the first-class cabin, the air was already cool and scented with white tea, a signature of the airline's attempt to court the ultra-elite. In seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane, sat Julia Becker. Julia was 28 years old, though she often looked younger when she wasn't wearing the sharp, tailored blazers required for board meetings. Today, she was dressed in a simple, high-quality cashmere hoodie and black leggings. She wore no jewelry, save for a small, understated gold band on her right thumb. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, functional bun. To the untrained eye, she looked like a college student who had perhaps been upgraded on a lucky ticket, or maybe the daughter of someone important. She was staring at a tablet, her fingers flying across a spreadsheet that detailed the logistical fuel costs of transatlantic routes. The piece of the cabin, which had been filled only with the soft clinking of glassware as the flight attendant, Sarah, prepped the galley, was shattered by the arrival of a man in a bespoke navy suit. Preston Calloway did not walk, he marched. He carried his leather weekender bag like a weapon. He was a man in his 50s, silver-haired, with a jawline that suggested he clenched his teeth in his sleep. He was the managing director of Calloway & Holt, a private equity firm that specialized in hostile takeovers and stripping companies for parts. He was used to rooms going quiet when he entered. He stopped at row 1, his eyes scanning the numbers. He looked at his boarding pass, then at seat 1B, and finally his gaze landed on seat 1A. He stopped dead. The scowl that formed on his face was immediate and visceral. "Excuse me," Preston barked, not at Julia, but over his shoulder at Sarah, the flight attendant. Sarah, a woman who had flown for Stratton for 15 years and had the patience of a saint, hurried over. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Calloway. Can I take your coat?" Preston ignored the offer. He pointed a thick, manicured finger at Julia. "There's been a mistake." Sarah glanced at her manifest. "I don't believe so, sir. You're in seat 1B, right here." She gestured to the plush leather recliner next to Julia. "I know where my seat is," Preston snapped, his voice loud enough that the other 4 passengers in the cabin turned to look. "My problem is with the seating arrangement. I specifically requested privacy. I paid full fare, not miles, not an upgrade. Full fare." Julia did not look up. She didn't even blink. Her finger swiped to the next page of the spreadsheet. "I understand, Mr. Calloway," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a soothing whisper. "The cabin is full today. Seat 1A was booked weeks ago." Preston leaned in, his cologne, something musky and overpowering, invading Sarah's personal space. "Look, I have a lot of work to do on this flight to London. Sensitive documents. I cannot have—" He gestured vaguely at Julia, his hand waving dismissively, as if she were a piece of luggage left in the aisle. "I cannot have someone looking over my shoulder, especially someone who clearly doesn't understand the etiquette of this cabin." Julia turned a page on her tablet. The digital sound was the only noise she made. "She hasn't done anything, sir," Sarah said, her smile faltering. "She's been seated for 20 minutes and hasn't made a sound." "It's the principle," Preston hissed. I know how these things work. Employee friends and family upgrades, lottery winners. They get up here, they get drunk on the free champagne, they get loud. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I practically own this route. I want her moved. Julia finally stopped reading. She didn't turn her head, but she paused. She took a slow breath. Sir, Sarah said, visibly stiffening, I cannot move a passenger who has a valid ticket. There are no other seats in first class. Business class is also full. Preston slammed his bag into the overhead bin with a violence that made the plastic casing rattle. Then put her in economy. I don't care where she goes. Just get her out of my periphery. I have a meeting in London that determines the fate of thousands of jobs, and I need focus. I don't need to be sitting next to her. He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't get him sued, but his eyes said everything. A distraction. From across the aisle, in seat 2A, an older woman named Mrs. Gable adjusted her glasses. She was watching the scene with the sharp, predatory interest of a hawk. Julia slowly placed her tablet on the tray table. She turned her head. Her eyes were dark, calm, and terrifyingly empty of fear. Is there a problem? Julia asked. Her voice was low, smooth, and lacked any inflection of anger. Preston looked down at her, sneering. The problem, he said, enunciating every syllable, is that this is a workspace for professionals, and I don't think you belong here. My ticket says 1A, Julia said simply. And who paid for it? Preston challenged, laughing darkly. Daddy? A rapper boyfriend? Or did you cash in a lifetime of food stamps? The cabin went deadly silent. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julia didn't flinch. She just held his gaze. I paid for it, she said. Same as you. I highly doubt that, Preston muttered, finally sitting down in 1B and aggressively buckling his seatbelt. Stewardess, champagne. Now. And tell the captain I want a word before we take off. This service is unacceptable. The plane taxied toward the runway, but the tension in the first-class cabin was thicker than the pressurized air. Preston Calloway drank 3 glasses of champagne before the wheels even left the tarmac. He spent the ascent aggressively typing on his laptop, his elbows purposely encroaching over the center console, invading Julia's space. Julia remained perfectly still. She had put on noise-canceling headphones, but she wasn't playing music. She was in transparency mode. She could hear every mutter, every huff of breath from the man beside her. Once the seatbelt sign pinged off, Preston slammed his laptop shut. He hadn't been working. He had been stewing. He hit the call button. He hit it 3 times in rapid succession. Sarah appeared instantly, looking harried. Yes, Mr. Calloway. This, he pointed at Julia, who was looking out the window. It's not working. I can feel her. Existing. It's claustrophobic. Sir, please keep your voice down, Sarah pleaded. Don't tell me what to do. Preston stood up. He was a large man, and in the confines of the aisle, he loomed over the flight attendant. I spend $50,000 a year with this airline. I know the VP of Customer Relations, Gary Sinise, personally. We play golf. If I call Gary when we land and tell him that the flight crew allowed a disruption in first class to persist, do you know what happens to you? Sarah's lip trembled. She was a single mother. She needed this job. Sir, please. I want her moved back to economy, Preston demanded loudly. Give her a voucher. Give her $500. Whatever these people take to go away, just move her. I can't, Sarah whispered. Why? Because she's black? Preston threw the words out like a grenade. Julia took off her headphones. She placed them gently on the armrest. She turned fully toward him. You seem very concerned with my background, Mr. Calloway, Julia said. Preston looked at her with pure disdain. I'm concerned with standards. This cabin used to mean something. It used to be for the captains of industry. Now they let anyone in who scrapes together enough miles. He leaned in close. You're making the flight cheap. You lower the property value just by sitting there. Mrs. Gable, across the aisle, spoke up. Young man, that is enough. She hasn't done a thing to you. Mind your business, you old bat. Preston snapped. He turned back to Sarah. Get the purser. Better yet, get the captain. I'm not flying 6 hours to London next to this. I want her gone, or I want a refund and an apology, and I want her banned from the airline. Julia looked at Sarah. Sarah, is it? Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, Mum, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to her, Preston shouted. Sarah, Julia continued, her voice steady as a rock. Please go get the captain. Mr. Calloway is right. We need to settle this immediately. Preston laughed, a cruel, barking sound. Finally, she realizes she's out of her depth. Go on, sweetheart. Go back to row 45 near the toilets. You'll be more comfortable with your own kind. Julia didn't respond to the insult. She simply picked up her tablet again. But this time, she wasn't looking at spreadsheets. She was opening a secure email app. She began to type a message. 2. Board of Directors. Subject: Immediate personnel restructuring. Sarah hurried to the cockpit. Minutes later, the curtain parted. Captain Anderson emerged. He was a tall man with 4 stripes on his shoulder, a veteran pilot who had seen everything from engine fires to drunk celebrities. He looked tired. He adjusted his cap and looked at the scene. Preston was standing, red-faced, triumphantly holding a glass of scotch. Julia was seated, calm, watching the captain with an unreadable expression. What seems to be the problem here? Captain Anderson asked, his voice projecting authority. The problem, Captain, Preston said, smoothing his tie, is that your booking system has made a grievous error. I demanded a private environment. Instead, I've been sat next to a token hire who is clearly agitating the other passengers. I see, Anderson said. He looked at Julia. Mum, has there been a dispute? Mr. Calloway wants me moved, Julia said. Damn right I do, Preston interrupted. And if you don't move her, I will pull my corporate account. That's 20 executives flying weekly. Do the math, Captain. That's $1 million contract walking out the door because you wanted to be woke. Captain Anderson looked at Preston, then at Julia. He was in a bind. He knew who Preston was, a notorious complainer but a high-value client. Airline policy was to de-escalate. Usually that meant asking the person with the least status to move to keep the peace. Mum, the captain said to Julia, his tone apologetic. I hate to ask this, but would you be willing to move to seat 4A in business? It's a lovely seat, very private. We would refund your ticket fully and offer a substantial voucher for future travel. Preston smirked. He crossed his arms. He had won. He always won. Money talked, and his voice was the loudest. Julia looked at the captain. You're asking me to move? To resolve the conflict, ma'am, for the safety and comfort of the flight. Julia stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a posture that suddenly made the cabin feel very small. She smoothed her hoodie. I won't be moving to business class, Captain, she said. Preston rolled his eyes. Here we go, the victim card. Drag her off if you have to. However, Julia continued, ignoring Preston, I agree that Mr. Calloway and I cannot sit together. The liability is too high. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin, black leather folder. She opened it and extracted a single, crisp document. It wasn't a boarding pass. It was a notarized contract, stamped with the seal of a massive international conglomerate, Helios Aviation. Captain Anderson, Julia said, handing him the paper. Do you recognize that signature at the bottom? The captain took the paper. He squinted at it. His eyes went wide. He looked at the signature, then up at Julia, then back at the signature. The blood drained from his face. That's the signature of the new majority owner, Anderson stammered. The merger was finalized this morning. We got the memo before takeoff. Read the name, Captain, Julia said softly. Julia Becker, Anderson read. I am Julia Becker, she said. I am the CEO of Helios Aviation. As of 8 a.m. this morning, I own Stratton Airways. I own this plane. I own the fuel in the wings. And technically, Captain... She turned her gaze slowly to Preston, who had frozen, his glass of scotch halfway to his mouth. I own the seat this man is sitting in. The silence that fell over the cabin was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Preston dropped his glass. It didn't break on the carpet, but the scotch splashed over his expensive Italian loafers. That's impossible, Preston whispered. You're a girl. You're wearing a hoodie. And you, Julia said, her voice turning into ice, are trespassing on my aircraft. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted so violently, it was as if the plane had hit an air pocket and dropped 5,000 feet. Captain Anderson was still holding the document, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at Preston Calloway, whose face had gone from a flush of anger to a pale, waxen shade of grey. The captain turned back to Julia, his posture changing from authoritative to deferential. He removed his cap, a gesture of old-school respect. Miss Becker, the captain said, his voice steady but humble. I had no idea. The briefing packet for the merger, I haven't even opened it yet. I assumed it was just corporate shuffling. I apologize profusely for this misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Captain, Julia said, her eyes never leaving Preston's face. It's a revelation of character. Preston finally found his voice. It was thinner now, reedy and desperate. This is a joke. It has to be. You're a kid. You're wearing leggings. You expect me to believe you bought Stratton Airways? He looked around the cabin, seeking an ally. She's lying. She printed that off the internet. It's a fraud. Sir, Captain Anderson barked, his patience evaporating instantly. I have verified the digital signature on my iPad. This is legitimate. Ms. Becker is the chairman of the board, and you are currently screaming at the owner of the vessel that is keeping you 30,000 feet in the air. I don't care who she is, Preston sputtered, though the fear was starting to leak through. She can't treat me like this. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I know Gary Sinise. Julia picked up her glass of sparkling water. She took a sip, calm as a mill pond. Gary Sinise, she mused. The VP of Customer Relations? Yes, Preston sneered, thinking he had found a foothold. My personal friend. I'm going to call him the second we land, and he will explain to you how the real world works. Julia set the glass down. Sarah? The flight attendant stepped forward, looking awestruck. Yes, Ms. Becker? Do we have the satellite phone uplink active? Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Please hand me the cabin handset. Sarah unhooked the white handset from the wall cradle and handed it to Julia with a long cord. Julia dialed a number from memory. She put it on speaker. The cabin listened to the ring. 1, 2. Hello? A voice answered. It sounded exhausted. Hello, Gary, Julia said. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Becker, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. We're still processing the transition paperwork. I know, Gary. I'm currently on flight 802 to London. I'm sitting next to a man named Preston Calloway. He says he's a good friend of yours. Preston puffed up his chest, a smirk returning to his face. Tell her, Gary. Tell her who I am. On the phone, Gary hesitated. Mr. Calloway? Yes, he's a frequent flyer, a high-value account. He's currently harassing me, Julia said, her voice flat. He demanded I be moved to economy because of the color of my skin. He threatened the crew. He claimed you would fire them if they didn't comply. What? Gary's voice cracked. I would never. He's invoking your name as a shield for his bigotry, Gary, Julia continued. Now, as the new owner, I'm evaluating the leadership culture of this airline. If this man is the type of friend you prioritize over the safety and dignity of your staff and passengers, I have to wonder if your values align with Helios Aviation. No, Gary shouted through the speaker. Miss Becker, please. I barely know the man. We played golf once at a charity event. Honestly, he's a nightmare. The support staff hates him. We've had 3 harassment complaints about him in the last year, but previous management swept them under the rug because of his spending. Preston's jaw dropped. The betrayal was absolute. Thank you, Gary, Julia said. That's all I needed to know. Your job is safe, for now. She hung up the phone and handed it back to Sarah. Preston sat there, stunned. The airlock of his privilege had been breached. His connections, his money, his status. None of it was working. Now, Julia said, turning her entire body toward him. Here is how the rest of this flight is going to go. You wanted privacy. You've got it. Captain Anderson? Yes, Ms. Becker. Mr. Calloway is cut off. No alcohol, no service, no meals. He is to be ignored for the duration of this flight. If he stands up, if he speaks to Sarah, if he so much as sighs too loudly, you are to restrain him with zip ties, and we will make an emergency landing in Newfoundland where the federal police will be waiting. Do I make myself clear? Crystal clear, ma'am, Anderson said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. And Mr. Calloway, Julia added. Preston looked at her, his eyes wide with a mix of fury and terror. You mentioned you had sensitive documents to work on, she said, gesturing to his laptop. I suggest you get to it, because when we land in London, you're going to need a very good lawyer. Preston sank back into his seat. He looked small. The leather chair that was supposed to be his throne had become his cage. For the next 4 hours, the first-class cabin was a study in psychological warfare. Julia Becker went back to work. She ordered a pot of herbal tea and a light salad. She chatted politely with Mrs. Gable across the aisle, asking about her grandchildren. She was the picture of grace. She thanked Sarah for every refill, every cleared plate. Beside her, Preston Calloway was disintegrating. The denial of service was absolute. When the smell of warm roasted nuts and filet mignon filled the cabin during the dinner service, Preston's stomach growled audibly. Sarah walked past him as if he were a ghost. She placed a white linen napkin on Julia's tray, poured a vintage Bordeaux for Mrs. Gable, and didn't even glance at seat 1B. Preston reached for his call button. Then he remembered the captain's threat. Zip ties. Newfoundland. He pulled his hand back as if the button were red hot. He tried to distract himself with work. He opened his laptop to review the pitch deck for the acquisition of Kensington Medical, the British pharmaceutical startup his firm was planning to gut. It was a vicious deal. Calloway and Holt planned to buy the company, fire 60% of the research staff, and sell the patents to the highest bidder in China. It was going to make Preston a $10 million bonus. He tried to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi to check his emails. Connecting. Error. Unable to join network. He frowned. He tried again. Access denied. Device banned by administrator. He looked up, head snapping toward Julia. Julia didn't look at him. She was typing on her own tablet, fully connected, streaming a news broadcast from Bloomberg. You blocked me, Preston hissed. Julia didn't respond. She simply tapped her ear, indicating she was wearing her noise-cancelling headphones, even though Preston could see the small green light was off. She could hear him. She just didn't care. Preston felt the sweat trickling down his back. He needed to send the final term sheet to his partners in London before he landed. If the term sheet wasn't signed by 5 p.m. London time, the exclusivity window would close, and other buyers could swoop in. "I need the internet," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, I have a deadline. This deal, it's huge." Julia took a sip of her tea. She turned a page on her digital reader. Desperation clawed at Preston's throat. He reached into his pocket for his phone, hoping to catch a stray signal, but they were in the middle of the Atlantic. He was digitally stranded. He watched Julia. She was typing an email now. He squinted, trying to read the screen, violating the privacy he had so loudly demanded earlier. The font was large. He caught a few words. Subject: Kensington Medical Asset Evaluation. To Helios Strategic Ventures Team. Preston's heart stopped. Helios, that was her company. Kensington Medical. That was his target. He watched in horror as Julia typed. Reviewed the financials of Kensington. Callaway and Holt are undervaluing the R&D division. Their plan is liquidation. I propose a counteroffer. White Knight strategy. We keep the staff, fund the research, and integrate their logistics into our medical transport division. Offer 15% above Callaway's bid. Execute immediately. Preston gasped. "No," he whispered. "You can't." Julia hit send. She finally turned to him. She took off her headphones. The look in her eyes was one of mild curiosity, like a scientist examining a bug. "Did you say something, Mr. Callaway?" "You're buying them," Preston choked out. "You're buying Kensington. That's my deal. I've been working on that for 6 months." "Business is competitive," Julia said, quoting the mantra Preston often used to justify his own cruelty. "I saw an opportunity, a company with great potential being targeted by vultures. I decided to save it." You used my presence here," Preston accused, his face turning purple. "You looked at my screen." "Actually," Julia corrected him, "I read about the Kensington struggle in the Financial Times this morning. I was on the fence about intervening. But then I met you." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the air outside the plane. "I sat here and watched how you treat people, how you treat staff, how you treat women, how you treat anyone you deem lesser. And I realized that if you treat a flight attendant that way, imagine what you would do to the 300 researchers at Kensington Medical." Preston was shaking. "This is illegal. This is insider trading or corporate espionage." "It's neither," Julia said calmly. "It's capitalism. I have better capital, and I have better morals. I just instructed my team to contact the Kensington board. By the time we land at Heathrow, they will have my offer. And since my offer includes saving their jobs, and yours involves firing them, who do you think they'll choose?" Preston slumped back. He felt like he was having a heart attack. The $10 million bonus was evaporating before his eyes. But it was worse than that. If he lost this deal, after promising his own investors a sure thing, his reputation would be in tatters. "You're ruining me," he whispered. "Over a seat?" "Not over a seat, Preston," Julia said, turning back to her window to watch the clouds. "Over the fact that you thought the seat made you a king. But up here, you're just a passenger, and I'm the pilot." The rest of the flight passed in a blur of misery for Preston. He sat in his dry, hungry, terrified silence. He watched Julia eat a warm chocolate chip cookie that Sarah brought her. He watched the flight map slowly tick down the miles to London. Every mile was a countdown to his destruction. As the plane began its descent into Heathrow, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Anderson. We are beginning our approach." I've been informed that we will be met at the gate by local authorities for a security formality. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the officers have boarded the aircraft." Preston closed his eyes. He thought the security formality was the police coming to arrest him for the disturbance. He braced himself for handcuffs. But he was wrong. The police were there, yes, but they weren't the only ones waiting. Julia looked at him one last time as the wheels touched the tarmac with a screech. "Welcome to London, Mr. Calloway," she said. "I believe the press is waiting." The Boeing 777 taxied to Gate 42 at Heathrow Terminal 5, the engines whining down into a low, mournful hum. Inside the first-class cabin, the silence was deafening. The seatbelt sign pinged off, but no one moved. Usually, this was the moment of the aisle rush, where businessmen scrambled to grab their bags and stand in the cramped aisle for 10 minutes just to get off 30 seconds faster. Not today. The other passengers, Mrs. Gable in 2A, the tech entrepreneur in 2B, and the couple in row 3, stayed seated, watching the drama unfold. Preston Calloway stared out the window. He could see the jet bridge connecting, but below on the tarmac, he saw the flashing blue lights of 2 police cruisers and a black van with tinted windows. "They're here for you," he muttered, trying to convince himself. He turned to Julia, a desperate sneer on his face. "You disrupted a flight. You impersonated a corporate officer. The British authorities don't play games with fraud." Julia was packing her tablet into her bag. She snapped the leather cover shut with a sharp click. "You're right, Preston. They don't play games." The cabin door opened, but instead of the usual rush of cool air and the greeting of gate agents, 2 uniformed officers from the Metropolitan Police stepped onto the plane. They were followed by a man in a sharp grey suit holding a clipboard. "We are looking for a Mr. Preston Calloway," the lead officer announced. His accent was clipped, professional, and utterly unamused. Preston stood up, smoothing his rumpled jacket. "That's me. Officers, thank God you're here. This woman," he pointed an accusing finger at Julia, "has hijacked this flight's service protocols and harassed me for 6 hours. I want to file a formal complaint." The officer didn't even look at Julia. He stepped into Preston's personal space. "Mr. Calloway, please step into the aisle and bring your carry-on luggage." "Am I being detained?" Preston demanded, though his voice wavered. "I am a British citizen. I know my rights." "You are being escorted off the aircraft for a breach of the peace and to facilitate an immigration hold pending an investigation into your conduct," the officer said mechanically. "Move. Now." Preston grabbed his bag, his face burning. He looked back at the cabin. "This is a mistake. You'll all be hearing from my lawyers." As he was led toward the door, he passed Sarah, the flight attendant he had tormented. She was standing by the galley, her hands clasped. She looked him in the eye and, for the first time, didn't smile. She just nodded at the officers. Preston was marched off the plane, down the jet bridge, and into the terminal. He expected a quiet room for questioning. He expected to be able to call his lawyer, smooth this over, and be at the Dorchester Hotel by dinner. He did not expect the flashbulbs. As he emerged from the secure area into the arrivals hall, escorted by the police, a wall of noise hit him. It wasn't just a few photographers. It was a media circus. Cameras flashed, blinding him. Microphones were thrust over the barrier. "Mr. Calloway, Mr. Calloway," a reporter from the Daily Mail shouted. "Is it true you called the owner of Stratton Airways a token hire? Mr. Calloway, do you have a comment on the viral video? Preston, over here. Are the rumors true that Calloway and Holt is losing the Kensington contract?" Preston stopped, stunned. He shielded his eyes. "What? What are you talking about?" Then he saw the screens. Heathrow's arrivals hall had massive digital billboards. Usually they showed ads for luxury watches or perfumes. Today, one of them was playing a news ticker, and on the screen was a grainy vertical video. It was him. It was a video taken from row 2, clearly by Mrs. Gable or the tech entrepreneur. The audio was crystal clear. Why? Because she's black? You lower the property value just by sitting there. The video looped. The caption read, "Banking exec's racist meltdown on flight 802. Preston felt the blood drain from his legs. It wasn't just a complaint. It was global. Behind him, the crowd parted. Julia Becker emerged from the gate. She wasn't being escorted by police. She was flanked by her own security team and the man in the grey suit who had boarded the plane, Stratton's London station manager. The reporters instantly shifted their focus, screaming her name. "Miss Becker! Miss Becker! Did you buy the airline just to fire him?" Julia stopped. She didn't shout. She just raised a hand, and the press quieted down. She looked like royalty in her hoodie and leggings. "I didn't buy the airline to fire him," Julia said, her voice amplified by the microphones thrust in her face. "I bought the airline to ensure that no passenger and no employee is ever treated the way Mr. Calloway treated us today. Stratton Airways is under new management, and our first policy change is a lifetime ban for Mr. Preston Calloway." The crowd erupted. Cheers broke out from the onlookers in the terminal. Preston stood there, the police gripping his arms. He watched Julia walk past him. She didn't even look at him. She walked straight to a waiting black sedan at the curb. Preston turned to the officer. "I need to make a call." "You can make a call from the station, mate," the officer said, pushing him forward. It took Preston 6 hours to get out of police custody. He wasn't charged criminally, yet, but he was cited for a public order offence and fined. The real punishment, however, was waiting for him in the City of London. His phone had been returned to him upon release. It was dead. He hailed a black cab, his hands shaking so badly he could barely open the door. "Where to, Gov?" the driver asked. "1 Canada Square, Canary Wharf," Preston rasped. "The Calloway and Holt building." The driver looked in the rearview mirror. His eyes narrowed. He recognized him. The video had been playing on the news all afternoon. "Right," the driver said coldly. He didn't say another word the entire trip. When they arrived, he didn't even say thank you when Preston overpaid. He just sped off, eager to be rid of the cargo. Preston stood before the glass and steel skyscraper that bore his name. Calloway and Holt. It was his kingdom. He had built this firm with Alaric Holt 20 years ago. They were sharks. They were untouchable. He straightened his tie, tried to wipe the grime of the police station off his face, and walked to the revolving doors. He swiped his security pass at the turnstile. Beep, beep, beep. Red light. Access denied. He frowned. He swiped again. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. "Must be a glitch," he muttered. He looked at the security guard at the desk. It was Thomas, a man Preston had walked past for 10 years without ever learning his last name. "Thomas, let me in. My card is demagnetized." Thomas didn't move to open the gate. He picked up a phone. "He's here, Mr. Holt." "Yes, I'll send him up to the conference room on the 40th floor. Visitor pass only." Thomas hung up. He walked around the desk and handed Preston a paper badge on a cheap plastic clip. It read, "Visitor, escort required." "You're joking," Preston spat. "Mr. Holt is waiting," Thomas said, his face stone. Preston ripped the badge from his hand and stormed to the elevators. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the office was quiet. Too quiet. Usually at 7 p.m., the analysts were still grinding away, but the bullpen was empty. Everyone had been sent home, or maybe they were hiding. Preston walked into the main boardroom. Alaric Holt was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. Alaric was a small man with glasses and the temperament of an assassin. He was staring at a tablet. "Alaric," Preston said, trying to regain his bravado. "You won't believe the day I've had. A complete misunderstanding. The airline is going to pay through the nose for this. I need you to get the PR team on the phone. We need to spin this before the Asian markets open." Alaric didn't look up. "Sit down, Preston." "I don't need to sit. I need a drink and I need a crisis manager." "Sit down!" Alaric slammed his hand on the table. The noise cracked through the room like a gunshot. Preston sat. Alaric slid the tablet across the table. It wasn't the video of the plane incident. It was an email chain. "We lost Kensington," Alaric said quietly. Preston felt the bile rise in his throat. "We can fix it. I'll call the CEO. I have a relationship." "You don't have a relationship," Alaric cut him off. "You have a viral video where you call a black woman property value damage." "Do you know who the CEO of Kensington is, Preston?" "His wife is Nigerian. He saw the video an hour ago. He sent me this." Preston looked at the tablet. The email from the Kensington CEO was one line. "We will never do business with Callaway and Holt as long as Preston Callaway is breathing. We have accepted the counteroffer from Helios Aviation." "Helios," Preston whispered. "She did it. She actually did it." "She outbid us by 15%, Alaric said. "But that's not the worst part. Because of the morality clause in our liquidity agreements, 3 of our biggest pension fund investors pulled their capital in the last 2 hours. We have lost $400 million in assets under management since you landed at Heathrow." Preston gaped. "400 million? "You are toxic, Preston," Alaric said, standing up. "You are radioactive." "You can't fire me," Preston said, his voice rising. "My name is on the building. I own 40% of the shares." Alaric smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "Actually, you don't. Remember the restructuring we did last year to dodge the tax liability in the Caymans? The bad boy clause? If a partner engages in conduct that brings material disrepute to the firm, the remaining partners have the right to buy out his shares at book value. Not market value. Book value." Preston's eyes bulged. "Book value? That's pennies on the dollar." "It's $2.50 a share," Alaric confirmed. "I triggered the clause 20 minutes ago. The wire transfer has been sent to your account. It should cover your legal fees." "What legal fees?" Alaric tossed a thick envelope onto the table. "The firm is suing you, Preston, for breach of fiduciary duty and damages to our brand. We are freezing your assets pending the lawsuit, and obviously the name on the building is coming down tonight." Preston stood up, shaking. "I built this. You're nothing without me." "I'm employed," Alaric said simply, "and I'm not the most hated man in London." Security guards appeared at the door. They weren't the friendly lobby guards. These were private contractors, big men with earpieces. "Please escort Mr. Callaway out of the building," Alaric said, turning his back to look out the window at the London skyline. "And make sure he doesn't take any company property, not even a pen." Preston was grabbed by the arms. For the second time that day, he was dragged away. "Alaric, you can't do this! Alaric!" Preston screamed as he was hauled down the hallway. He was thrown out of the revolving doors onto the cold pavement of Canary Wharf. His visitor badge fluttered to the ground. He stood there, shivering in the London drizzle. He checked his phone. One notification. It wasn't a text from a friend. It wasn't an email from a lawyer. It was a notification from the Stratton Airways app. Flight update. "Dear Preston, thanks for flying with us. We hope you enjoyed the service. Please rate your experience with crew member Julia Becker." Preston stared at the screen, and then, in a fit of impotent rage, he threw the phone into the gutter. But the story wasn't over. Karma had taken his job and his money. But Julia Becker had one final lesson to teach him. 6 months later, London was gripped by a bitter November chill. The rain was relentless, washing the grime of the city into the gutters of the West End. Inside Le Jardin, a Michelin-starred French restaurant in Mayfair, the air was warm and smelled of truffles and cognac. It was the kind of place Preston Calloway used to visit 3 times a week. He used to have a permanent table near the fireplace. He used to snap his fingers at the staff to demand a fresh bottle of sparkling water before the previous one was even finished. Today, Preston was at Le Jardin, but he wasn't sitting by the fireplace. He was standing near the kitchen doors, wearing a stiff white uniform that was slightly too tight around the neck. He held a silver tray with a trembling hand. His fall had been absolute. The lawsuit from Calloway and Holt had drained his liquid assets. His wife, humiliated by the social pariah status he had brought upon the family, had filed for divorce and taken the house in the Cotswolds. The final blow came when the British financial regulatory body permanently revoked his license to trade. He was 55 years old, radioactive in the business world, and broke. He had applied for consulting gigs, ignored. He had applied for mid-level management, rejected by algorithms. He had applied to drive for a ride-share app, rejected due to his background check flagging the public order offence at Heathrow. So, he called in a favour from an old acquaintance who owned Le Jardin, begging for work. The only opening was for a junior server, a bus boy, essentially. "Table 4 needs water, Paul," the maitre d' hissed, snapping his fingers in Preston's face. Preston flinched. He was going by his middle name, Paul, to avoid recognition. But the humiliation was internal. He hated the snapping fingers. He hated the way the customers looked through him as if he were furniture. It was exactly how he had looked at people for 30 years. "Yes, sir," Preston mumbled. He grabbed the crystal pitcher and walked toward table 4. It was the prime table, the one by the window overlooking the street. As he approached, he saw the guests. It was a business lunch, 3 people. One was a tall, distinguished man, Dr. Aris Kalu, the CEO of Kensington Medical. The second was a young woman in a sharp grey suit holding a tablet. The third person was facing away from him, looking out the window. She wore a cream-coloured cashmere blazer, and her hair was pulled back in a familiar, practical bun. Preston froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "No, it can't be." Dr. Kalu laughed, raising his glass. "To the merger, then, and to the expansion of the research facility. Honestly, Julia, when you approached us with that counteroffer, you saved 300 jobs. The morale has never been higher." The woman turned from the window. It was Julia Becker. She looked different than she had on the plane. She looked older, wiser, but her eyes held that same terrifying calmness. She clinked her glass against Dr. Kalu's. "It was the right thing to do, Aris," Julia said. "Stratton Airways needed a medical logistics partner, and you needed a shield against the vultures. Win-win." Preston stood paralyzed 3 feet away. He wanted to run. He wanted to drop the pitcher and sprint out the back door into the rain. But he needed this job. He had rent to pay on a basement studio apartment in Croydon. He had bills. "Water, please," Dr. Kalu said, glancing up at the waiter without really looking at him. Preston took a breath. He forced his legs to move. He stepped forward. He tried to angle his face away, pouring the water into Dr. Kalu's glass, then the assistant's. Then he moved to Julia. His hand shook. The ice in the pitcher clinked loudly against the glass. Julia looked up at the sound. Her eyes travelled from the silver pitcher, up the stiff white sleeve, to the name tag that read Paul, and finally to the face. Preston stopped pouring. He couldn't breathe. The silence at the table lasted only a second, but for Preston it stretched for an eternity. He saw the recognition in her eyes. He waited for it. He waited for her to scream. He waited for her to tell the table, "This is the racist who abused me." He waited for her to demand the manager and have him fired. It was what he would have done. It was what he had done 12 times to people just like him. He braced himself for the destruction. But Julia didn't scream. She didn't smirk. She didn't even frown. She simply looked at him with a profound, crushing pity. It wasn't anger. It was the way one looks at a car crash that has already happened. "Thank you," Julia said softly. Preston's throat clicked. He couldn't speak. He finished pouring the water, a single drop spilling onto the tablecloth. "I'm sorry," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. It was the first genuine apology he had uttered in decades. Julia paused. She reached for her water glass. "Everyone has a role to play. Paul," she said, emphasizing the name on his tag. "I hope this one suits you better than the last one." Preston nodded, his face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a sunburn. He retreated to the kitchen, his legs feeling like jelly. He spent the rest of the service hiding in the pantry, polishing silverware, terrified to go back out. When the lunch rush ended, the maitre d' walked in. "Table 4 has left," the maitre d' said, looking at Preston with a confused expression. "They asked for the check, and the lady left this for you." He handed Preston the bill folder. Preston opened it. Inside was the merchant copy of the receipt. The bill was for $400. On the tip line, Julia had written, "Zero no denuncias, ruhauseras." But underneath, there was a note written in elegant blue ink. "Mr. Calloway, I did not tip you because I know you would find charity from me humiliating. Instead, I have purchased a voucher for an intense executive coaching course on empathy and leadership in your name. It is fully paid for. If you complete it, Helios Aviation might have an opening in our baggage handling department. Everyone has to start somewhere." J.B. Preston stared at the note. Baggage handling, the bottom of the ladder. He looked around the steamy, noisy kitchen. He looked at the pile of dirty forks he had to polish. He looked at the angry chef yelling at a sous chef in the corner. He closed the folder. He didn't tear up the note. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. It was a long way down from first class. But for the first time in his life, Preston Calloway was actually on the ground, and he had a lot of work to do. Preston Calloway learned the hard way that a platinum status card doesn't make you a platinum human being. He thought his money gave him the right to treat Julia Becker like she was nothing, only to find out she held the keys to his entire future. It's a brutal reminder that you never truly know who you're sitting next to, and that kindness is the only currency that never devalues. Julia didn't just win by buying the airline. She won by keeping her dignity while Preston lost his. What do you think? Did Preston deserve a second chance in the baggage department? Or should Julia have just ignored him completely at the restaurant? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We post new dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on, because they might just be the one signing your paycheck tomorrow. See you in the next video.